So, let's talk about fursuits. We can't talk about fursonas without talking about fursuits. I don't know if there's a few fursuiters in here. Certainly we saw about 1,000 of them run by during the fursuit parade a little while ago. Yeah, fursuits, if you don't know, they're these mascot-style costumes running around. Some of them more recognizable than others. Some of them a little stranger than others. I don't know what this is, but I love it. Right. So we're going to focus on fursuits for a bit because the media certainly likes to focus on fursuits. In most definitions that you see in the media, furries are defined as people who wear fursuits. I want to argue that this would be like trying to define sports fans as people who wear jerseys. Right? This is not true. You can absolutely love a sports team without buying the jersey for them. That's only one way of many that you can express your interest for this particular fandom. So, as it turns out, only 28% of furries actually owns a fursuit. Right? So, far more furries don't own fursuits than own fursuits. Right? As it turns out, about 8% of furries have tried their hand at making a fursuit at one time or another. So, furries are a very creative bunch. There we go. I want to argue that one of the reasons why fursuits come up so often when defining furries is because fursuits are the most visibly recognizable part of the furry fandom. I'd wager that if I took a picture of this room right now and showed it to some people and said, what is this a room full of? People would have no idea. I'd see a bunch of people, right? I'd see the occasional fuzzy suit, but for the most part, it's just a bunch of people. If I say, think about a room full of Trekkies, or Trekkers, people who are fans of Star Trek, you're going to picture people wearing colored Starfleet uniforms. Most Star Trek fans do not own a Starfleet uniform, but this is the most visibly iconic representation of that fandom. So this is why fursuits, despite not being as common as most people think in the fandom, are certainly what comes to mind first, especially when you talk to the media. So are there any differences between those furries with fursuits and those who do not? As it turns out, some things make them a little bit different. As it turns out, the furries who wear fursuits tend to identify themselves as being more furry than the non-suitors do. It doesn't mean non-suitors aren't furry, it just means that you have to be at least a certain amount of furry if you're going to drop a few $1,000s on a fursuit. Kind of makes sense. In the same way that you have to go to more than one sporting event to decide to go out and shell out a few $100s for a sports jersey or season tickets. We do find that fursuiters are more likely, per capita, to be women. Women are actually more likely to fursuit than men are. We do find that compared to non-fursuiters, fursuiters tend to have more active fantasy lives. They spend more time fantasizing and daydreaming and thinking about fantasy-themed activities. Fursuiters are less likely to describe being furry as a fetish than non-fursuiters are. We'll get more into that idea in a little bit, but just to sort of prime that idea. Fursuiters drink more. And I don't just mean water, although you should be hydrating if you're wearing a fursuit. Don't pass out and dehydrate. But yes, they also tend to drink about 50% more alcohol than non-fursuiters do. Fursuiters also tend to report having more problems socializing outside of their fursuits than non-fursuiters do. So, as we're starting to see in some of our research, one of the big reasons why fursuiters fursuit is because it allows them a vehicle, a medium for getting to be more social and interact with other people in a way they might struggle to do in their day-to-day lives. Not every fursuiter, of course, but for many, this is a common drive, a motivator for it. When we asked a whole bunch of fursuiters to list some of the reasons why they fursuit, one of the bigger ones was because it's easier to interact with other people when they're in suits, especially people who I don't know, right? It's really weird for me to go up to a stranger and say hi, might make them a little off-put. When you're a giant cartoon character, it's a little bit easier, right? You're de-individuated. It's a little less anxiety-provoking for you. Certainly we find as well that a lot of furries say that the fursuit becomes its own character. It allows them to be something different. It allows them to do different things, including things like charity work, including going out to hospitals, including going out when the Syrian refugees in Canada were coming over. They happened to stay in the same hotel as a bunch of furries. And it went over wonderfully, right? It went over gangbusters. The kids thought this was wonderful. They didn't know what was going on, but it was cool, right? Wearing my fursuit allows others to see another side of me. If you're a very shy person, but you want others to be able to see you and interact with you, what better way than to have a fursuit to project that part of you that you want people to see? And yeah, it allows you to feel more extroverted, to be more confident when you're in this fursuit. Okay, this one, I love this study. Okay, so we've been asked a few times, well, furries spend so much time looking at animals and anthropomorphic animal characters. Are they like kind of weird and out of touch with people? Like, do they struggle to recognize human faces because they spend so much time staring at animals and anthropomorphic animal characters? I want to argue that it's a little bit like cars, looking at cars. My dad is one of those people who can, when a car goes by, he immediately knows the make, the model of the year. I see a box with 4 wheels. So I want to argue that that same ability, that same expertise of spending 20 years looking at cars that allows my dad to recognize the make and model, furries kind of do that as well. A person from the outside might look at this and see 8 different blue animal things, right? Not really able to distinguish features. They're just all kind of blue, fuzzy animal critters. Furries can look at this and distinguish the subtle little differences between them. Differences in fursuit make, differences in species, differences in coloration, little features that you might not otherwise notice. And so, we put furries and college students to the test. We had them look at faces. We had them look at, fursuit faces, furry faces, human faces, and fursuit faces. And this is a published article in the Journal of Cognition and Culture. This is a published scientific article that has fursuits in it. And what we found was that furries and non-furry college students did just as well at recognizing human faces. Furries are not deficits in recognizing human faces. They're just freakishly good at recognizing furry faces and fursuit faces. What my dad is to cars, furries are to furry faces. We spend so much time looking at art and looking at characters that we can recognize them better than the average person can. Kind of a neat little superpower if you think about it.